Before long, we'll be selling this house and moving into a high-rise condo, so you'd better start looking for a new place," Olivia's mother, Helen, sneered. "Don't think for a second you'll be getting a dime of our father's inheritance, Lauren," she added with a cold edge in her voice. "We're having you relinquish your right to it." "Got that?" My sister's words cut deep, her face twisted into a cruel mask. Lauren's boyfriend stood nearby, laughing as if the situation were some sick joke. It was unbearable. Our father's funeral had just ended, and they were already discussing money. The sheer callousness was too much to handle. "I can't take this anymore," I shouted, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "I'm cutting ties with all of you." Just as the words left my mouth, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a man standing there, someone who looked vaguely familiar. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Olivia, 23 years old, and about to graduate from university. I'm not one to boast, but I consider myself strong-willed and patient. I've always been focused and dedicated to my studies, maintaining good grades throughout my academic career. I have dreams I'm determined to achieve, and although I'm generally content with my life, there's a significant worry that I can't shake. Olivia, come downstairs now." My mother's loud voice jolted me out of my thoughts. With a sigh, I reluctantly went downstairs, leaving behind the comfort of my studies. "Mom, Lauren, what's going on?" "I was studying as usual," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "You nerd. Still studying when university is almost over? What a hard worker," Lauren mocked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She was always the center of attention, just like our mother had been in her younger days as a model. Now, Lauren was unemployed, using the excuse of helping around the house to avoid finding a job. "We're going shopping. You stay here and clean the dishes, do the laundry, and don't forget to iron properly," my mother ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Also, we're out of detergent and a few other things, so you should go shopping too." I knew better than to talk back, so I simply nodded and agreed. Feeling the weight of their demands, I left the house, stressed but determined to get through the chores. As I began cleaning up the mess they'd left behind, I muttered to myself, "I need to get on with this." My mother, a former beauty queen with a taste for luxury, had always favored my beautiful sister, leaving me in the shadows. Despite everything, I pressed on, knowing I had to stay strong. I've never been considered all that pretty, and to make matters worse, my family has always treated me like a maid, dumping all the housework and chores on me. My sister Lauren has taken full advantage of this, and I've been oppressed by them both since I was little. Yet, I've tolerated it because, despite everything, they are my family. Then one day, my phone rang. When I looked at the screen, it was Dad. "Hello, Dad. It's been a while," I answered, feeling my mood lift instantly. "Oh, Olivia, it has been a while. Are you doing okay?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar. "I'm doing great. How about you, Dad? It's nighttime there, right? How's work?" "I'd like to say I'm fine, but I've been having some headaches lately. I'm planning to see a doctor soon. How's school going for you?" "Dad, take care of yourself, okay? As for school, thanks to you, everything is going well. I'm studying hard to achieve my dream." "That's my girl. You're always so diligent. Remember what I always tell you, be righteous and kind." "Don't worry, Dad, I'm doing my best." "That's my Olivia. I'll bring lots of souvenirs when I come home next time." After that conversation, I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of emotions. To put it bluntly, my family is well off, largely due to my father, Jerry, who has worked tirelessly, flying around the world for his job since he was young. Although he was often away, he was always kind to me, showering me with love whenever we had the chance to be together. I adored him more than anyone else. But to my mother, Helen, and my sister, Lauren, he was nothing more than an ATM. They lived lavishly off the money he earned without a second thought. Be righteous and kind, Olivia, he would always say. His presence was nurturing and supportive, and he was my rock, the reason I've been able to stay strong all these years. But then, several months after I graduated from university, something chilling happened. Olivia, Dad has, Helen burst into my room, her face as pale as a ghost. Apparently, my father had collapsed at the airport as soon as he returned home and was rushed to the hospital. The moment I heard the news, Lauren, Helen, and I headed to the hospital in a panic. When we arrived, we found my once strong and vibrant father lying frail and helpless. We suspect he's had a stroke, the doctor informed us. Despite receiving extensive treatment, my father's condition barely improved. He was left with severe physical paralysis and a speech impairment, unable to stand or speak properly. Seeing him in that state broke my heart. I knew I had to step up, so I made the difficult decision to put my dreams on hold and dedicate myself to caring for him at home. Predictably, Helen and Lauren completely ignored him, treating him as if he were useless. They didn't lift a finger to help with his care or even visit him. Mom, Lauren, if you helped out with Dad's care once in a while, I'm sure it would make him really happy, I suggested, trying to appeal to their better nature. But they just brushed me off, continuing to live their lives as if nothing had changed. And so, I found myself alone, caring for the man who had been my only source of love and support in a family that seemed to have forgotten what those words even meant. I begged them for help, but their response was always the same. We're too busy. You take care of Dad. So, I did. Every day, I sat by my father's side and told him about the beautiful weather, even though he could only manage a faint response. I dedicated myself to learning everything I could about caregiving. I kept the curtains open so he could see outside, prepared special meals for him, and arranged fresh flowers in his room every day. Although professional caregivers helped, I poured my heart into making sure he was comfortable, remembering how hard he had worked for us and how much love he had given. Whenever things got tough, I recalled my father's words. Olivia, always be righteous and kind. Those words gave me the strength to carry on. But one day, I overheard a conversation between Helen and Lauren that shook me to my core. Thanks to Dad's insurance money, I was able to buy that bag I wanted, Helen said, her tone casual, as if she were talking about pocket change. I know, right? Thanks, Dad. Maybe I should get a new wallet too, Lauren chimed in. I bit my tongue, fighting the urge to yell at them. But then Helen said something even more shocking. If Dad were gone, we'd receive a few $100 million from his life insurance and inheritance. He's been saving up through his job and investments. Wow, Mom. We should totally buy a luxury condo, and my boyfriend could live with us, Lauren replied, excitement in her voice. Oh, I wish Dad would hurry up and die, Helen added with a sigh. I couldn't bear it any longer. My father was struggling to stay alive, and they were already spending his insurance money, fantasizing about a life of luxury after his death. It made me feel sick with anger and despair. Recently, they had been splurging on brand name items and even taking overseas trips, leaving my father and me behind. But I couldn't bring myself to tell my father any of this. He was already going through so much, and I didn't want to add to his pain. Pretending I hadn't heard their cruel conversation, I continued to devote myself to his care. Many friends and acquaintances came to visit him regularly, and it warmed my heart to see how much they loved him. One visitor in particular stood out, a distinguished older man in a suit and glasses. I wasn't sure of his exact role, but I guessed he was an executor for my father's company. He always greeted me politely, bowing his head, and I could tell he genuinely cared for my father. On the days when my father had visitors, his face seemed brighter, and I naively hoped these peaceful days would continue. But a few months later, my father suffered another stroke. This time, it was too much for him to fight off, and he passed away suddenly. My heart broke, knowing that the one person who had always loved me unconditionally was gone. I clung to my father's lifeless body, sobbing uncontrollably. Even my mother and Lauren shed tears this time, mourning the loss of my father. What followed was a blur, a whirlwind of events. There was the wake, the funeral, and all the necessary arrangements that had to be made. Despite being the chief mourner, my mother did nothing, and neither did Lauren. In the end, it was left to me to handle everything on my own, rushing through the procedures and trying to keep it all together. The wake concluded, and the funeral was attended by many people. The sheer number of flowers and the crowd that came to pay their respects spoke volumes about the kind of man my father had been. Seeing how much he was loved gave me a small sense of comfort. As the funeral proceeded, the sound of sobbing filled the air, and with a peaceful expression on his face, my father began his final journey. By the evening of the 7th day after his passing, I was just beginning to recover from the initial shock and sadness. As I was tidying up after the day's rituals, my mother and Lauren called me into the living room. Sitting next to Lauren was a man she introduced as her fiancé. He was handsome like her, but knowing he used to be a male stripper, his frivolous nature was clear. His name was Larry. "So, about your father's inheritance," my mother began, and I felt a terrible sense of dread. Then, with a scornful laugh, she said something outrageous. "We're going to get a lot from your father's inheritance, so we've decided to sell this house and move into a luxury condo. You need to move out. Mom, it's only been a week since Dad passed away, and you're already talking about the inheritance and a luxury condo?" I asked, horrified. "We've already signed the contract," she said nonchalantly. "It's a brand new high-rise." "You've already signed? When did this happen?" I asked, trying to make sense of it all. "About a month ago, I guess," she replied, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. A month ago? But Dad was still alive and he was practically dying. "He had a lot of money, so it'll work out fine," my mother interrupted, as selfish as ever. Lauren chimed in. "Yes, that's right. The luxury condo is for Mom, me, and my fiancé. You're just in the way, so you should hurry up and find some shabby apartment." "Even you, sis? Are you serious?" I asked, stunned by her coldness. "Of course. And don't even think about getting any of Dad's inheritance. We'll make sure you renounce it. You understand, right?" Lauren said, approaching me with a terrifying expression, while Larry stood by, laughing. Their greed and callousness were suffocating. They had the nerve to talk about this while my father's mourning period wasn't even over. The betrayal was too much to bear. "You guys are the worst. I can't stand it anymore," I said, my voice filled with anger and despair. "I'm cutting ties with both of you," I declared, my voice shaking with emotion. "Good riddance," my mother and Lauren sneered, their laughter cutting through me like a knife. I clenched my fists, trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. Just then, the doorbell rang. I wiped away my tears, trying to steady my breath before opening the door. I assumed it was a late visitor offering condolences. "Good evening. My deepest condolences for your loss," said the man standing at the entrance, bowing deeply. It was the middle-aged man in a suit and glasses who had frequently visited my father. "Thank you, please come in," I stammered, about to invite him inside. But before I could, the man handed me his business card. "Please take a look at this. My name is Eric, an attorney assigned by your father." I glanced at the card, which indeed belonged to a law firm. For the first time, I noticed the lawyer's badge gleaming on his chest. I was taken aback. "A lawyer?" I echoed, surprised. My mother, Lauren, and her boyfriend appeared behind me, curious about the visitor. "What does a lawyer want with us?" my mother asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "I'm here to discuss your husband's inheritance. May we talk for a moment?" Eric replied calmly. We all moved to the living room. My mother sat directly across from Eric, with Lauren and her boyfriend beside her. I found myself alone, seated opposite them. Eric pulled out several documents from his bag, looked at us, and began to speak slowly. First, may I read your husband's will? He asked. That man could barely move or speak, and yet he left a will? Get on with it, my mother snapped, irritation clear in her tone. Very well, Eric said softly. He began to read. The testator, Jerry, hereby bequeaths all property belonging to him to his second daughter, Olivia. The room fell into a stunned silence. Eric was about to continue when Lauren interrupted. Wait a minute, what did you just say? Did he really say that? She demanded, her voice rising. The testator, Jerry, hereby bequeaths all property belonging to him to his second daughter, Olivia, Eric repeated. What does that mean? My mother and Lauren exclaimed in unison. I was too shocked to react, barely able to breathe as I tried to process what I had just heard. Eric continued, turning his attention to me. Next, I will read the postscript of the will. This is your father's final message. I listened quietly, my heart pounding in my chest as Eric read aloud. Olivia, you gave up your precious dreams to take care of me. I wasn't able to pay much attention to you because... His voice trailed off, but the message was clear. My father had acknowledged the sacrifices I made, and he left everything to me as a final gesture of love and gratitude. I was always busy with work, but I truly appreciate everything you did for me. Thanks to you, I was able to pass away peacefully and with a sense of fulfillment. As Eric read my father's final words, tears welled up in my eyes. Olivia, always be kind and true. I know you can do it. Your father will always be watching over you. Please be happy. All I could do was sob in front of them. Meanwhile, Helen and Lauren were in a frenzy. What does that mean? So, the inheritance all goes to her? What happens to our money? They demanded, their voices rising in panic. Eric glanced at them briefly before responding. You two are not mentioned in the will. Furthermore, Olivia is also the sole beneficiary of the life insurance. What are you talking about? How can that be allowed? Helen's face turned beet red, ready to explode with anger. Isn't there something called a statutory portion that's guaranteed to the wife and children? Lauren leaned forward eagerly, hoping for some loophole. You're referring to the statutory reserve, Eric said calmly. Indeed, you both have the right to claim a statutory reserve from the inheritance Olivia will receive. Helen seemed to regain some of her usual composure. Even if there's a will, if its contents are unfair, we can claim our share of the inheritance as prescribed by law. Eric continued. However, Jerry had us investigate the fact that both of you, Helen and Lauren, were living extravagantly off his money, squandering it on luxury items and trips. He knew everything but chose not to confront you directly. Helen and Lauren's eyes widened in shock. Yes, Eric said. You purchased a luxury condo, a car, and spent lavishly at host clubs and on overseas trips, all while leaving the caregiving and household chores to Olivia. There were even remarks made wishing for Jerry's death. My father knew everything. He knew everything but pretended not to. I whispered, overwhelmed by the revelation. Helen stammered. That's not true. Eric responded calmly. Given these circumstances, it's highly unlikely that a court would deem the will's distribution unfair. You are free to contest it, but I will be representing Olivia in that case. My mother's face turned pale, and Lauren muttered in disbelief. This is ridiculous. As Eric prepared to leave, I walked him to the door. He turned to me and said, Olivia, you've grown up to be quite admirable. Your father always spoke of you with such pride and joy. Really? I asked, touched by his words. Yes. I've known your father since we were young, and it was an honor to take on this request. Your father felt he had been too lenient with the others, but I believe he found peace knowing how well you've turned out. Eric smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I was so touched by his words that tears welled up in my eyes again. Please live a happy life from now on. You know I'm always here to help, Eric said kindly as he left. I bowed deeply in gratitude, feeling a sense of hope for the future. 2 years later, with Eric's help, I successfully inherited all of my father's assets. As for my mother and sister, things took a different turn. My mother, unable to keep up with the loans for the high-rise condominium, lost everything. The expensive car and designer goods were repossessed, and she eventually went bankrupt. My sister, on the other hand, was quickly abandoned by her boyfriend when he found out she wouldn't be inheriting anything. I heard through the grapevine that she's now living with my mother and working part-time. For a while they tried to contact me, but I consistently replied, "I've cut ties with you. Please contact me through a lawyer." I believed that was what my father would have wanted, and eventually, they stopped reaching out altogether. As for me, I used my father's inheritance to pursue a dream I had once given up on. I enrolled in law school. Originally, I had wanted to become a prosecutor, inspired by my father's words to always be kind and true. But after working closely with Eric, who had been my rock during such a difficult time, my dream changed. I began to admire the role of a lawyer, someone who provides justice and support when it's needed most. Now, I'm studying hard to become a lawyer, just like Eric, someone who is always fair, just, and kind.